I'm Dr. Yosefa Fogel-Rubel. This is a podcast episode brought to you by Matan Women's Institute for Torah Study. Welcome back to our Bamidbar series titled Community Between Order and Chaos, where we are exploring the gap between the vision for community laid out in Bamidbar and the real-life challenges to this order presented throughout the book. Each week, I am partnering with a communal leader from around the world to explore these themes. We'll hear about their different challenges and the responses to those challenges during this difficult year, as well as our usual deep dive into these themes in the parsha. To sponsor an episode, please contact me at podcast@matan.org.il or the Matan office directly. I remind you that sponsoring an episode is a wonderful way to mark any occasion, whether happier or more somber. So reach out and be in touch. Parshat Korach hinges on a few stories of rebellion, represented by Korach's vocal antagonism towards which is a source of debate. The opposition rebellion is comprised of four factions. We have the Levi'im against Aaron, Datan and Aviram sort of rallying against Moshe. We have the Nesi'im, the princes, against Aaron. And we also have sort of the entire community that kind of joins in against Moshe and Aaron. Well, in Parshat Balotcha, we spoke about the pitfalls of Moshe's leadership through the prism of his internal emotional breakdown. Here, the challenges emerge external to him, and his responses are varied, both in approach and their effectiveness. We will speak about this in depth in today's conversation. After the challenge to Moshe and Aaron's leadership, the parsha continues with clarification of Levitic responsibilities and the danger implicit in them if mishandled, as well as the trumot tithes given to the Levi'im. The parsha opens with the Levites' challenge to Moshe and then proceeds to illustrate how the division of responsibility really is held by the entire tribe. In other words, that Korach wasn't really seeing the facts straight. He might have had a lovely role carved out for him if he would have been able to get past not being the one at the helm. Another important theme of the parsha is collective punishment. Is this something that the Torah supports? A collective punishment of the rebels seems to suggest yes. However, later in the parsha, responsibility for encroachment becomes the lot of the Levites. They can die if an Israelite encroaches on tabernacle responsibilities. The sources then are a little bit conflicted and really deserve more careful analysis, but I'm just pointing that out as another point to think about to take away from the parsha. We won't really get to it today, but I think it's also a really interesting piece that comes up. My guest today is Rabbi Yehuda Sarna. What an honor it is to have him. Yehuda Sarna serves as executive director of the Bronfman Center for Jewish Student Life at New York University, where he is also the university chaplain. He co-directs the dual degree program, the MPA, MA in Hebrew and Judaic Studies, and is an adjunct associate professor of public service at the Robert F. Wagner School for Public Service. He's a senior fellow of Many Institute of Multi-Faith Leadership at NYU, where he designs educational experiences and curricula to train the next generation in interfaith action. We'll also hear more about that in today's conversation. From 2019 to 2023, Rabbi Sarna began serving as the chief rabbi of the Jewish Council of the Emirates, a representative body of Jews living in the UAE since the turn of the 21st century. He teaches and lectures at NYU Abu Dhabi and regularly attends the Abu Dhabi Forum for Peace. Rabbi Yehuda Sarna, it is a pleasure and honor to have you on the podcast today.
Oh, it's such a pleasure to be here.
We had the pleasure also of having your wife a few months back when I was trying to sneak in some extra series on awesome Jewish women. So I'm really happy to be rounding out here the Sarna family on the podcast.
There's nothing
to
round out. You should have had her back.
I should have had her back. Yeah, she's amazing. So I just wanted to really explain to our listeners today why I really wanted to have you. So I also just want a little bit of full disclosure. Rabbi Yehuda Sarna is also an old, dear friend of our families. He's married into the Walden family, who's just really in our soul of my own nuclear family. And so I had the privilege of really meeting Yehuda so many years ago. We were just reflecting before we started recording on how much time has passed and how old we both have gotten since we first met each other. So, but I just wanted to really, in this series that we're doing with communal leaders from really all over the world, we're really looking to hear about people's experience that they've been having this year within community building that they're involved in and the communities that they're trying to bridge connection between them. And you sit at this really fascinating nexus. You're both in like the heart of the NYU community, which you've been at for so many years, over 2 decades that I right? Something like that, over 2 decades. And you also have this really wild position working with the Jewish populations and also non-Jewish populations, of course, in the UAE. And so when I speak with you about community, I'm a little bit trying to hit at both of those, and I'm sure we'll touch upon both of them. But I just think that your like window into community and the complexity of all of that has come to mean this year, and the always fraught relationships becoming even more fraught and perhaps even almost impossible. I'm just so happy that you were able to join us for this series. So I kind of want to invite you to jump into this conversation wherever it feels right. Whether you want to jump in on the parsha side or you want to jump in from the communal side, I'm gonna make sure we get to both. So sort of jump in wherever it feels right for you.
Why don't we start with the parsha?
Okay, amazing. I'd love that.
So it struck me a few years ago, actually, that Korach is understudied, dramatically understudied, given the time that we're living in, for a host of reasons, the prevalence of social media being one of them. We live in a time, certainly in Western countries, with intense political polarization, inability to understand alternative narratives, other sides. And what I've learned is that every crisis of listening is actually a crisis of curiosity. One of my teachers and mentors, Carol Gilligan, likes to say that listening is what happens when you replace judgment with curiosity. Mm-hmm. And so if there is an issue with listening, it's really because at the root of the issue is a crisis of curiosity. And what does it take to reclaim that? In this week's parsha, we see Korach's attempt to really split the people, to dethrone Moshe, dethrone Aaron, and his attack cuts very deep. It's very personal. The way I read it, Moshe really experiences shame as a result of Korach's attack. This is not just a bunch of mit onanim. These are not just tlunot. These are not just complainers. These are not just morim. In all those instances, Moshe experiences anger. But here we see that when Korach steps forward, we see that Moshe covers himself. He covers his face. He falls on his face, as if to say, I wish I weren't here. I wish I weren't experiencing this. And so I guess the first thing I was thinking about was reading the story of Korach through Moshe's reactions, through the reaction of shame. And one of the preeminent scholars on shame was a psychiatrist whose name was Donald Nathanson, who had studied the 9 basic affects, that is, the way a person's face looks from the time they're a baby to adulthood. There's 9 basic affects, 2 of which are positive. So one of them is interest, like curiosity. The second is joy. Then there's a neutral affect of surprise, and then there's 6 others which are negative, and one of those is shame. And so he was most curious about shame. What is shame? And when he studied how it is that people react to shame, he described it as a compass, that there's basically 4 different reactions that people can have. And I'll get back to Moshe in just a second, but if you will, just indulge me. He says that one reaction to shame is withdrawal, much like Moshe did, vayipol panav, to hide oneself, to pull oneself out of the situation, run away, to hide. A second reaction is avoidance, which very often finds its form in denial. no, this didn't really happen. A third reaction is to attack oneself. I'm so stupid. How could I have done this? I don't deserve to be here. I don't deserve to live. I don't, all these kind of, a lot of negative self-talk, and sometimes even more than, sometimes it manifests as self-harm. And then the fourth reaction is attacking others, right? Instead of attacking oneself. And we do this all the time. You know, someone accuses us of something, whether it's in a context of a friendship or spousal relationship or siblings, you know, you did this. Oh no, you did it first. It's in a way, it's a very basic instinct. So when we look at Moshe's reaction to Korach, to me, it seems very different than some of the other critiques that Moshe's had to endure over Sefer Bamidbar. Right? This is not, his reaction is not just to get annoyed, right? This is not just an annoyance. These are not mit onanim or tzlunot or where he says he's annoyed by it. Maybe sometimes he gets angry, but what we see here in the reaction to Korach is he is reacting. He is navigating the compass of shame, and so his first reaction is vayipol al panav, to withdraw. I wish I wasn't here. And then his second reaction is to attack others. The basic critique of him was Rav lachem b'nei Levi. You took too much. Lama titnasu al kal Hashem. And so what does he do? He says, you're shaming me. I'll attack you back. Rav lachem b'nei Levi. Korach, what? It's not enough what you have. And I think one of the pieces that's often lost when it comes to dealing with communal dissent, and particularly the way leaders deal with them, and which is particularly important now in this moment of intense polarization, is we really struggle with how to deal with as communal leaders, we struggle with how to deal with our own shame. We have a difficult time coming to terms with some of the basic reactions, our own reactions to being shamed, to confronting our shame. And, you can see this on the political or communal landscape. The way some people, when they're ashamed, they just want to attack other people to deflect the attention from themselves, or they just need to withdraw, or they just need to deny that anything bad has happened, or they really start inflicting harm on themselves. And I take Moshe's reactions here as an indication somehow that there's a piece of what Korach did, of what Korach said, which was true, and therefore it's done. So it's not just an annoyance, but it was a real critique. And Moshe was shamed. And this is the last thing I'll say on this, is that he was shamed despite the fact that he is so humble, because being shamed does not correlate to how arrogant or how humble you are. It's just about being human. There's no shame in experiencing shame.
One thing I just want to bring in to sort of like bring what you said into, I think, a broader view is that in theory, Moshe was threatened by Eldad Umedad, right? But he doesn't react.
Not at all.
But he doesn't have any reaction. Because why? Because he doesn't feel threatened by the idea that other people could be prophets. And as you said, there's something about what Korach says. When I'm just saying as a human, not as a communal leader, if we're somebody who we're not always angry people, like when somebody is able to like really get under my skin, I immediately self-reflect, which is, I think, the response, right? That's what we need to do. Like, I don't always manage to do my best, but meaning immediately self-reflect. I'm like, why is this bothering you? Right? Meaning, why is this? And because people could say lots of silly things to me and it won't really ruffle me. But then there are things that people will say that will, because it hits upon a point that's really sensitive, because it hits upon something that I myself am not confident about. And as you said, Korach does this to Moshe. He hits upon something that Yehoshua didn't threaten, that Eldad Umedah didn't threaten, but something here, maybe because Moshe has his own suspicions or fears that maybe there is too much going on in one family, right? Or maybe Korach himself, well, he's not a figure that we know. Maybe he really was somebody who Moshe contended with. Maybe he was that guy in the congregation who really constantly gave like the jabs. Do you know what I'm saying? And at a certain point, it becomes too much. But I think it's such an important self-reflective point you're raising, which is that like when we see that we're reacting so intensely to something and we don't necessarily usually react like that, it's an amazing opportunity to like reflect on ourselves curiously, meaning to take those natural responses of shame and say, don't go there. Don't go to grandiosity, right? You said it was about attacking others. Don't go to grandiosity. Don't go to those self-flagellation, but to be like, what is happening now? Like, to me, it's that moment where like you don't send the email, you don't return the phone call, you go to get a night's sleep, and then you wake up in the morning, if you have the privilege of taking time to respond, and you think, oh, okay, that's what was going on. Which, by the way, for me is one of the most dangerous things about social media, because to react as our better selves, we usually can't react instantaneously. Like I rarely can go through that method. So I'm just connecting to the points you were sharing.
I love the parallel that you drew to Eldad and Medad. Right, Moshe's line, Umi yitain kol am Hashem nevi'im. He's saying in some ways the same thing that Korach is saying. Right? Let everybody should have a chance. But there was something about what Korach said, and I think it's because Moshe is not a jealous person, right? He's an empowerer. He has no difficulty in seeing other people shine. Eldad and Medad become prophets. He has no issue with that. But the issue is in the words Lama titnas u'akal Hashem. Moshe, but why did you place yourself over other people? And as soon as it's on, it's an attack on Moshe. It's not just about other people having the stage. It's an attack on Moshe. Then it's at that point that he really experiences shame.
I think also that again, this is like a little bit too close to psychoanalyzing Moshe, but for the sake of our conversation, I'll go there. I think that because he also brings it up himself, at the root of what Moshe does is kind of this feeling of, I was never supposed to do this to begin with. Like, I don't think he ever told, like, it takes him a very long time to give up this idea of like, I didn't even want this job, right? God forced me to do it. I tried to say no many times. Like, I think that it eventually he does release it and totally take ownership over his leadership of Am Yisrael. But like we're a little bit still, and then remember, Korach is likely happening at very much towards the beginning of the wilderness experience, likely. And I think Moshe isn't yet at that space where he's totally taken ownership of the fact that no one really forced me into this role. And even if Hashem did force me into this role, I own this. I am supposed to be here. And I think he's still like in that transitional space of feeling like only when you kind of like relinquish like the earlier aspects of like your own personal, how did I get to this? I think can you really like own it is what you're supposed to do and then do all the work you have to do to be there. But as long as you're like holding on to this piece, like the phrase Lama titnasu, I imagine Moshe saying to himself, what do you mean? I didn't even want the job.
So I think besides for right now the attack getting very personal on Moshe, I think there are one or two other things that may have done it. I'm curious what you think, but this is an attack also that comes from within his own tribe.
Yeah.
And it might be that Moshe takes that particularly personally.
Mm-hmm.
And it may also be that there was something about, and this is not explicit in the text, and it's really anyone's guess, but maybe there was something very righteous and well-intentioned about Korach. People read Korach so many different ways. It's like a blank canvas, really.
Yeah.
But there's a different kind of experience when when people are whining and complaining, as opposed to someone stepping forward and saying, "Look, it's not about me, but come on, aren't we all supposed to be? Aren't we all sacred people? Aren't we all holy people?"
Mm-hmm.
And let's say Korach really, really meant that,
Yeah.
and then he can't. It forces Moshe into this position where he can't deny that there is some validity to the critique. So very often, if someone raises a critique, we like to dismiss it either based on the content or based on who it's coming from. And if we feel like both of those things are are less vulnerable, if the content, if the argument is strong and the person is otherwise known to be an upstanding person, um, then we experience shame.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think I think that there's a real thread here, and I think that it's, as you're saying, it's hitting on something really really deep within Moshe. I think also the loyalty of the tribe of Levi was like one of the few things that Moshe had to hold on to. Like, you're aware when you're a leader that you're very very lonely, like you're very lonely, and you know that all of Shevet Levi, like those were his loyal people. That's who he got. Mila Shem Elai. Do you know what I'm saying? And so here it's like, you feel like this is obviously like coming very close to the current situation we're in right now, but like feeling like the people that were closest to you, that were part of your group, are no longer on your side. And maybe they haven't been on your side for a long time and you kind of actually missed it. You kind of were blind to the fact that they weren't totally with you, or that you're with you for very particular reasons under particular circumstances. So I think that there's also like a sensitivity for Moshe on like the abandonment piece, like a feeling like they've left me, you know. He really needs that close loyalty of a few, because his position among the people is not to be their favorite, he's to be their leader.
So one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about has been this instinct to attack others when we feel shame, to really deflect all the attention and the hurt and the pain, and just throw it right back at somebody else, whether it's the person who attacked us or the person who is who might even be less vulnerable, more vulnerable and easier to attack, in order to shift the blame. That's often the way it's manifest. So, look, I think one context in which this has come up, especially on university campuses, has been, and this has been discussed a lot in the media, has been the presence of Jewish students at the encampments or at the anti-Israel protests, and very often within mainstream media narratives, when the question of, well, what do American Jews think about what's happening in Israel, in Gaza? Very often they'll use the few Jewish voices who do exist in anti-Zionist spaces and say, well, I guess there's, two different reactions. And then the way it's presented, which is really out of step with what the data show and the numbers and where we see that people really are, is they present it as two equal narratives, of equal weight, when in fact it's not that way at all. And I found myself becoming very, very frustrated with that, with reading those narratives, and particularly because I think one of the strategies of the encampments typically was to do everything that they could, on the one hand, to avoid being seen as anti-Semitic by highlighting and spotlighting the presence of Jewish students, putting them up in front of the media, broadcasting that they were having Shabbat dinners or Pesach seders and things like that, which and my experience as I kind of went through our own, like an inventory of our own student population, there may be a handful out of literally thousands of Jewish students who were active in the encampments scene. And I don't know if that's true of every other campus. I have no way to know that. But guess the real question is, given that it's our instinct when we feel shame to attack others and to call other people out, we also have to ask ourselves, is that, like you said before, is that the best reaction? Is that the smartest thing to do? Will that lead to the best outcome? So I've many colleagues who often say, well, instead of calling people out, try to call people in.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of blaming them for taking a certain position, is there a way for you to not close them off, but just to take a little bit more time to try to understand them? Very challenging in moments like these.
Yeah. Yep.
Josefa. Very challenging.
Yep.
But I had numerous interactions, sit down, very open with students who identify themselves as anti-Zionist, students who identify themselves as, not sure about where they stand. And of course that, might change given whatever happened that particular week. Especially people who are unsure, feels kind of different when there's rockets and missiles and drones coming from Iran, as opposed to another week when there's a hospital bombed or something, something that makes it less palatable as an American to stand right next to Israel in that moment. But as time wore on, and you might not agree with this position, and my guess that many listeners might also not agree with this position. But I think we have to do a lot of calling in. I'm not talking about. I don't mean in like I'm not a military strategist. I'm not saying anything about military confrontation. I'm talking about areas and spaces, geographies, which are very, very far, hundreds and thousands of miles away from the actual military conflicts. Don't we have to find a way to call people in? In March, I went with a group of students. I teach a class on extremism. And what's unique about the class is that we study extremism not of any one particular group, not one nationality, not one race, not one geography, but we study extremism as a human phenomenon, as something that every culture and creed is susceptible to. We are all susceptible to extremism. And one of the things we did is we went to Montgomery, Alabama to understand the history of slavery and anti-Black racism. And we visited in the home of Martin Luther King, who was the pastor of a church in Montgomery and famously led these protests, and read one of his speeches together. And really what distinguished him from many other people at his time, many other leaders at his time, is that he was able to provide a vision of the future that was not us or them, us or you or me. It was he was able to provide a vision which left which was open to forgiveness and resentment, and left aside resentment. And it was a transformative vision that said that he had a dream that at one point there will be Black children and white children playing together, even though to many of the people to whom he was speaking, as well as rivals of his, rival leaders, looked at that and saw that was betrayal, that was foolish, that was wrong. And so I think about the natural human reaction to these feelings of how could they, how could this person do that? And it feels like they're doing that to me. And then I feel in myself, all I want to do is, there's part of me that wants to withdraw. There's part of me that wants to attack. And I have to ask myself, but is that really the wisest thing? Is there a way, even in a polarized moment like this, to offer a more transformative vision?
Do you think that part of what makes it more transformative is that essentially you're describing a non-politicized reaction, meaning to a political moment, you're looking at some of like the psychological underpinnings of what pushes people to believe in those things. I identify with that as like a life approach. I think it's also part of what enables people to be curious. Many people in the world are not able to separate like those politicized moments. I'm going to ask in a second if you agree with what I said that maybe you're doing internally, right? But some people are not able to separate like the political belief from, oh, well, trying to understand the space from within someone that these ideas emerge. Am I understanding correctly? Because in theory, you sit at like a pretty like politicized space, right? But in many elements of your work. So I'm just curious, like, is that what you're saying? That you think that part of what a leader can do to transform or like elevate kind of the moment is to step back from the politicization of what's going on and kind of take it from the human?
I would not say that I'm approaching things apolitically. It's impossible. So I just think that sometimes we can get into a mode where we only see life through one set of lenses, when the reality is that we need many, many, many lenses, right? We're many different kinds of people, right? Like you began talking about what it means to own motherhood and own the mother identity. And there are many identities that each of us hold, right? So I think that because it's hard to see other people's, it's hard to see past our own pain, that we kind of give ourselves permission to stop trying. And we do need a practice, an exercise of let me practice taking off my political lenses and putting on my a lens of compassion, put on a lens of curiosity, put on a lens of protector. Each of us, we play so many different roles, both for our communities, for our families, for ourselves. So, your question made me think about this book by Howard Gardner called Leading Minds. So Howard Gardner, psychologist, helped develop the theory of multiple intelligences, and part of his argument is that 5-year-olds and 10-year-olds and 15-year-olds, following those developmental psychologists who believed in stage theories, particularly about moral thinking. He says, 5-year-olds tend to think in terms of us and them, and then 10-year-olds tend to think in terms of what's fair, what's not fair. 15-year-olds tend to think in more relativistic terms. And the point that he makes is that the 5-year-old voice in us is not supplanted by the 10-year-old mind, which is not in turn supplanted by the 15-year-old mind. It's always there. We always have it in us. And for many people, sometimes we can approach one domain of our life through, very sophisticated moral reasoning or other kinds of reasoning. But then there still be other parts of our life that we think in terms like a 5-year-old. Are they on my team? They're not on my team. And that's it. That's all that matters. And we can see this, sometimes I have friends who are, great scholars and whatever, but then when it comes to politics, all they want to know is whose side a person who they're talking to is, friend or foe, and that's it. They never take the argument on the argument's terms, but just in terms of who's saying it, and that's all that matters. And so I think that's also at play, is that when we feel afraid, where there's good reason for a lot of us to feel afraid, we will revert in our moral thinking just to the 5-year-old mind.
Yep.
It's normal. It's natural. It's a survival instinct. It has to be that way.
Yeah.
But that is, so we need to constantly check our own fear. We need to check our own fear. So, I mean, that's one of the things that I've observed happen is to myself. I'm not even commenting about anybody else, but the first time I heard some of the chants going on in New York City, globalize the Intifada, they're just even hearing the word Intifada chanted over and over and over and over again, um, many times over. And then, that made me feel afraid. Of course, it made me feel afraid.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, it made me feel like, well, I just want to, yell back at those people, or I want to run far away. I don't want to be experiencing this fear. And then on the other hand, okay, so that's the way I feel in the moment. Then I think about it a little bit more, and I'm like, well, yes, words can lead to action. I do need to be aware, conscientious, guarded. But do I need to be afraid right now? I don't think I need to be afraid right now.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I do, but I need to have a better check on my own fear. Because what happens is this: if fear drives us back to the us and them moral thinking, then we will miss things, even for our own benefit. I wonder, and I'm not commenting. I'm not talking about within Israel. That's not, it's not. I don't live in Israel, so it's harder for me to comment. But I can say from outside, there are a lot of people who have really stepped up and continue to play in the role of us and them. And what I'm curious about is whether in the long run we're going to suffer from a deficit of bridge builders.
When you think about the people who you would want to raise as communal leaders within the Jewish communities that you're leading, are those the kind of people that you are looking for? Like, you're looking for people who are able to put aside the us them element and be people who, like, is that what you look at as the right kind of leader that the world needs right now?
We need both.
Mm-hmm.
We are vulnerable. We need both.
Yeah.
And part of being a bridge builder in my mind is recognizing the validity of fear and the us and then thinking that fear induces.
Mm-hmm.
That's real. That's human. That protects, right? If we don't have, that, we were in Israel on October 7th. We were here for Sukkot. And I say here because I'm here again now. And just the power of the instinct of people just getting up from their regular lives and realizing, whether they were 18 or whether they were 48 or 58 or 68, and saying, like, we have to protect our house. I forget how people said it. Lochamim al habayit.
Yeah.
Some version of that.
Mm-hmm.
That it's that instinct which protects.
Yeah.
It's a necessity. So when I say bridge builder, I don't mean for a split second anybody who will approach the issue with naivete or with this kind of, and this does irk me, but this kind of like privileged air of like, oh, I know, I got it all figured out. Why can't we all just compromise and share? And and it's like, no. This is not a kind of moment where any kind of I don't even have the words for it, but this kind of like privileged or entitled viewpoint, as if anyone here has all the answers, that will fly, or that anybody, or that the terrorists on October 7th would have distinguished or did distinguish in any way between this kind or that kind. They didn't. And therefore, so no naivete here. What I'm talking about is when I say bridge builder, bridge has to be planted on both sides. So how do I really understand what it means to be firmly planted within my own?
Mm-hmm.
That I owe my safety to people who are willing to take certain risks and put themselves ahead of me in confronting conflict of a certain kind, and that I am also doing another kind of work that will make the world a safer place for those people as well. It's a different kind of safety.
I'm curious, and is this like the most challenged you've felt occupying spaces that are by definition with both Jewish populations, and you also, have participated over the years in so much interfaith, specifically with Muslim populations? I guess I'm a little curious how does that even function this year? And I'm also just curious in terms of, before we started speaking, I said to you that this was like by far the worst year I've ever had living in this country. And I'm just curious if you've experienced something like that in what you're going through.
Yeah. I mean, it's been a very, very challenging year. I've come to look at it through the lens of, essentially a generation of interfaith work spurred by 9/11 and wanting to create healing after 9/11, and through the rise of Islamophobia and the intense Islamophobia in the United States. And one of the premises of that generational wave, I would call it, of interfaith work was, was privileging the face-to-face, person-to-person interaction. The premise was what some people call the social contact theory, which is that even if I just know one person who's a member of another group, I'll have a more favorable viewpoint, a view of that whole group. And therefore I feel like, okay, so let's catalyze as many person-to-person relationships as we can between different groups, and we'll have a more harmonious society. And the more I know you, the more I'll like you. And I think one of the things that happened post October 7th is in the very complex interfaith environment, in the coalitions that had been built and friendships that had been made, organizational collaborations that had been established, that premise became inverted. People started feeling like, I don't want to know what you really think. Because if I know what you really believe, then I'm going to think much worse about everybody else who's a member of your group. And that is true in all directions.
Wow.
And so we're at the precipice here of needing interfaith work will always be important in any diverse society, but we need to find a new approach. And which is okay, because there have been different waves. There's the wave of religious leaders up on the stage making pronouncements on behalf of their religion. That kind of exercise became a little empty, but at certain heights, certain peaks of that movement, it was very significant. When the Catholic Church says we are going to change our doctrines, it's a big deal.
Yeah.
When people say, we're going to do a full review of some of our texts and understand, can they be contextualized? Do we need to have a firmer stance on people who take them in an extremist direction? Like, that stuff is real. That stuff mattered and continues to matter. But that wave kind of passed, and people realized, well, in the next moment, the person-to-person connection is much more important. I don't know exactly what's next, but one of the things that does give me hope, actually, is an interfaith compound in Abu Dhabi, which has 3 separate buildings, a mosque, church, and a shul, which are connected by an educational center. It opened in February of 2023. I'd been working on it since 2019, on helping design the synagogue and the shul complex as a sanctuary, Beit Midrash, two mikvaot, residence. So it's a beautiful building. My guess is that at least some of your listeners have seen it or have even davened there. There's Shabbat davening every week, and hundreds of people for Rosh Hashanah, for Pesach, bar mitzvahs, weddings, etc. And it's continued to function. And if its first year of operation had over 120,000 visitors, people have come in, walked through all three. And initially, I thought, well, isn't it going to be critical for there to be, a deep relationship between each of the clergy, a deep relationship between, and so many honest conversations between members of different faith communities. And now I'm actually not so sure whether just having the architecture and the power of the symbol is enough, especially in a moment like this, but is enough to give people hope and to hold up an ideal of something that people can be striving for, even if it's very difficult to put into practice.
Yehuda, I know that you're here also on occasion of your son Amital's bar mitzvah, right? Who I'm assuming is named for Rav Amital from Yeshivat Eretz Zion, although I forgot that piece.
Yes.
I guess I'm curious.
He was born on Chavchet Sivan, which is a day after the Yortzeit of Rav Amital, which was on Chav Zayin Sivan.
I guess I'm curious what meaning this is kind of holding for you. Also coming back, you guys were here on October 7th and the days after before you were able to go back home. Just curious what space you're coming at this event in.
Well, we're very proud, first of all, of our son Amital. And one of the reasons that we chose to name him for Rabbi Yehuda Amital is because I was in Yeshivat Har Etzion when Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated, and Rav Amital was asked to join as a Sar B'litik, minister without portfolio, but essentially to help try to play that bridging role between religious and secular that I think he was uniquely positioned to do at that moment.
Yeah.
And so that legacy always sticks with us. And, Amital, my son, who was named both for Rav Yehuda Amital, but also his first name Gershom, for a member of my wife's family who played a critical role in saving all of them during World War II. And so I think a lot about the duality of his name, what it comes to mean, on the one hand, as Gershom, the Gershom in my wife's family, who really took care of his own and did everything he could in order to save his family, obviously at the risk of his own life. And Rav Amital, who had somehow mastered the ability to be a bridge builder. And so those are some of the thoughts that we're coming into the bar mitzvah with. My own son, he loves playing hockey. And so he knows what it means to be on a team and do everything for the team. But he also, he gets that one of the most important things about a sport is that, when you leave the ice, then, you have something else in common, which is you're all hockey players, even if you're, not on the same team. So, so I'm kind of holding the two truths of each of his name. I'm holding them as we come into this very joyous celebration for our family.
Rabbi Yehuda Sarna, thanks for coming on the podcast today. Really, really appreciate it. And wishing you a big Mazal Tov.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode from Matan Women's Institute for Torah Study. If you would like to sponsor an episode, please contact the Matan office or email me at podcast@matan.org.il. Please do us and all women's Torah learning a favor and share this episode with all of your friends and family.